As a little kid, I spent a lot of time by myself watching VHS tapes. Probably at around age 4 or 5, I would watch and rewatch my family's copy of My Neighbor Totoro. Then, as I got older, I became completely obsessed with Pokemon, and eventually learned what anime and manga were and dove in headfirst. I watched Toonami and Adult Swim, and would get really excited about the new Yu Yu Hakusho DVDs my parents paid for me, which I got as they came out. I've mentioned before how we would go to Blockbuster once a week and rent a new movie as a family. In late 2003, when I was 12 or 13 years old, I noticed a thick magazine on the wire rack there that I had never seen before. It was an issue of the American version of Shonen Jump, a manga anthology that came out once a month and showcased shonen manga. Basically manga meant for teenage boys, usually centered around sports or fighting, often with superhuman characters fighting evil muscular dudes in tournaments, saving the world, stuff like that. I recognized the main character of Yu-Gi-Oh! On the cover, and the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu Yu Hakusho were a couple of the comics inside. I remember my parents being annoyed at me for reading it at the dinner table, and I remember being introduced to this comic called One Piece, a story about a guy who ate a cursed fruit that turned him into a rubber man.
どれあなた、一体何者なの？俺は海賊王になる男だ。
After about a year of reading monthly releases and buying the volumes, I found some bootleg One Piece DVDs made in Hong Kong and ordered them off of eBay. It was the first 120 episodes of the show. I, somehow, finished the entire set in 10 days, on top of school and homework and eating and a little sleeping I did. The subtitles were in broken English, so I wasn't sure about character names or exactly what was going on, but that didn't matter. The story was straightforward and strong enough for me to still understand most of what was happening, and even if it hadn't been, I would have been completely enamored either way. Lots of shonen manga are about a boy or young man who is stupid but headstrong and pure of heart, who wants to be the best in the world at something, who, on his adventures, collects a ragtag team of underdog weirdos, and together they triumph over adversity and learn the true meaning of friendship. This describes One Piece as well as it describes loads of other media I consumed as a kid and as a teenager. But even from the first moment I was exposed to it, I could tell that there was something different about One Piece. What is maybe the most brilliant aspect of One Piece, especially in a piece of media that is accessible to and targeted towards kids and teenagers, is the story's ability to sustain rapid shifts in tone and juxtapositions of tone without breaking apart. How it can be simultaneously sweet and goofy, and darkly funny or violent. It's first and foremost an adventure story, so the main, enduring emotional components are going to be excitement and wonder, but it has a wide emotional bandwidth that includes the heartbreaking and the heartwarming in equal measures. Most characters have a tragic backstory to explain their motivations and their personality quirks, some of which are legitimately shocking and upsetting, but still manifest present day in the story in ways that are bizarre and comical. In an interview, Simpsons writer Ron Haig described the comedy of Yes as how, in any unusual or difficult situation, somebody acting surprisingly positive can be as fun as making them snarky. Unrelenting positivity and excitement in the face of bizarre and difficult circumstances is one of the things that makes Luffy so endearing, and what makes the series so funny and charming as a whole. The art style itself is also pretty immediately striking. Oda's art has improved and changed significantly as he's developed it over the years, in some ways that are distracting and disappointing. But even going back to when he was 17 years old, it certainly stood out. I've heard people call it off-putting and ugly, but I always considered it gorgeous. There's so much humor and life and loving detail put into every single panel. There's also an unabashed vibrancy to his color pages, and his use of warped perspective and his hallucinogenic storybook-style designs provide a great contrast with the darker thematic elements of the series. One Piece isn't really meta, but Oda plays a lot with archetypes and expectations, often by undercutting them constantly. The dour and serious swordsman archetype could be applied to Roronoa Zoro, one of the main characters. He's a former bounty hunter known for his ruthlessness and his killing instinct, and he's pretty easily the most intimidating member of Luffy's crew. He carries the weight and memory of his dead friend, and his end goal, no matter how difficult it is or how mutilated his body gets along the way, is to be the strongest swordsman in the world. He also loves to drink and has a terrible sense of direction.
それにしちゃまるで刃物で切ったような悪口だぞ。バカ言え、誰が切るんだよ、こんなでけえ船。てめえ、俺たちの新世界への夢をよかな。船を間違えた。
When he meets a mid-level marine who looks sort of like his dead friend, he becomes comically awkward around her. He has a decidedly undignified rivalry with the ship's cook.
麦わらの手下海賊狩りのゾロだ
手下だってよ。じゃあおめえはそれ以下じゃねえか。海賊 A。じゃあ B。本当によく似合う。王子様のようだぜ。アホ王国の。
Who himself often undercuts his own moments of victory.
食事中は極力音を立てませんよ。
By being a massive idiot who fawns over women.
はいはい、これだからさっさとここ開けて。
当てしなきバカだなあいつ。
One of my favorite minor scenes in the series is one where Zoro is trapped, so he very vocally decides to cut his own legs off because having no feet but being alive is better than being dead.
自分の足を冗談やめてよ。
冗談じゃねえよ。ここから抜けてるにはそれしかねえんだ。
He stops halfway because he thinks he's going to be saved. Then realizes he's probably gonna die anyway, so then his solution is to strike a cool pose.
おい、ポーズ取るなら今のうちだぜ。
あんたと一緒にしないで。ミスター武士道、もっと真面目にやってください。
俺いつでも本気だぜ。
Using desperate self-mutilation to escape dying while trapped on the giant wax cake, and then having the desire to have a cool-looking corpse, are both emblematic of Oda's love of darkly funny juxtapositions. It's not uncommon for a character who may be intimidating or a straight man in one situation
まだレフトアームがドッキングしてね。
おい、何してるニコロビン。早く左腕にドッキングしろ。ロビン、急げ。来いロビン、俺のようにやれ。
嫌よ。人として恥ずかしいわ。
して
人として恥ずかしいわ。
to be endearingly goofy in another.
かわいい。
One character, nicknamed the Surgeon of Death, who has a really disturbing devil fruit ability, hates bread.
サンジ君のサンドイッチね。サンドイッチってなんでござるか。
俺はパンは嫌いだ。
Also, Zoro got stuck in a chimney once and it was really funny.
この町にいたのか。
いや別に。
煙突に刺さってた。
Zoro's fighting style uses 3 swords, and his signature attack early on in the series is called onigiri. Basically meaning Oni Slash or Demon Cutter or so on, but also meaning rice ball. Character names and attack names and names of locations are often puns and double entendres pulled from a variety of languages, folklore, and other cultural touchstones from all over the world. Zoro is named after real-life pirate Francois Lolonais, and probably Zoro and possibly Zoroastrianism. Usopp is another main character.
俺の名前を覚えておきな。キャプテン！ストップ！Thank you, baby.
Uso means lie in Japanese, and his name is a portmanteau of Uso and Aesop, and his long nose is an obvious reference to both Pinocchio and Tengu. Usopp's outward personality and his early fighting style are, as you may have guessed, based on lies and exaggeration, and he uses them to mask his fear and physical weakness compared to other characters.
お前ら、物事をマイナスに考えることにおいて、この俺を超えられると思うな！
As a chef, the character Sanji refuses to use his hands to fight and instead uses his legs. Most of his attack names are food puns.
俺の騎士道が甘いだと。俺が誰も守るんだと。 ワトリエナシード乗れ究極聖剣千枚柄ムートンショップ
He detests waste of food because when he and his mentor were starving to death, his mentor cut his own leg off and ate it so Sanji could survive. Also, his look is based on Steve Buscemi in Reservoir Dogs. Luffy, carefree as he is, got his scar because when he was a kid, he stabbed himself in the face to try to prove that he was tough enough to be a pirate. I have never in my life seen the kind of creativity and spread of influences Oda took in his character designs replicated anywhere else. Each member of Luffy's crew has a distinct color palette, a distinct range of cultural influences and languages they pull from, a distinct emotional bandwidth that varies from person to person, a distinct relationship with every other member of the crew, and a distinct fighting style. Lots of the characters ate devil fruits and gained weird powers, but not everyone has one. Sanji, Usopp, and Zoro don't. Because Oda's characters don't all need those sorts of weird powers to be interesting and entertaining. Rather than a bunch of strong dudes, you get the captain, the first mate, the navigator, the sniper, and the cook, and others I don't want to spoil, each with their own personalities and ways of viewing and interacting with the world, and each of them still integral to Luffy's life mission despite their differences, which are seen as assets rather than hindrances. The series is about doing anything to attain your ambition, regardless of cost, but also about how others are assets rather than obstacles. Luffy is a formidable pirate, but because of the fruit that he ate, he can't swim, and he has to rely on physically weaker but just as valuable crewmates to save him when he goes overboard. He gives a speech fairly early on that left a huge impression on me as a kid, about how he relies on others because he can't be good at everything, and how that doesn't make him a lesser person or captain, about how individualism will always leave you at a loss, and how it's okay to admit that you need people.
あ？何を言い出すんだあいつは。
公開術も持ってないし、料理も作れねえし、嘘もつけねえ。
おい。
俺は助けてもらわねえと生きていけねえ自信がある。
You might be put off by the length of One Piece, but really it's a quick, easy, and fun read. There's no way that the depth of its mythos and the breathtaking sense of scale it has could have been developed over a shorter time, so the length should be seen as an asset rather than something daunting or a pain. The only real caveat I have is that Oda's treatment of women and queer people and trans people oscillates between well-rounded characters with drive and agency, to sort of caricature but still beloved fan favorites, to so awful I'm not even gonna show you. In a world where anything can happen, where the sky isn't even the limit. I mean, we're way past the sky now, in terms of bizarre, unrestrained creativity and meticulous, deep, expansive world building. Feminine weakness is still a thing for some reason. To an extent that is sometimes embarrassing. And despite the diversity in male designs, women are usually either super hot or old and or ugly, with little in between. And trans people are portrayed as scary, gross men in dresses. There's a difference between women expressing their frustration with being oppressed or considered inferior, or about how they're just as valuable as powerhouse men in spite of their physical setbacks. Which, while problematic and needlessly gender essentialist in an unlimited fantastic universe, can still be engaging and even relatable with whatever the hell this is. There are still a lot of interesting ideas at work though. The entire main cast is full of anti-heroes who value their dreams and freedom and those of others above all else. It's a world where the survival of your will and your dream are more important than the survival of your intact body.
てめえ、まさか
血でも砂は固まるだろう。
And the series explores darkness without ever descending into cynicism. Despite having a bizarre and morbid sense of humor, One Piece is probably the least cynical thing you'll ever read. The whole point of a later arc is that you can't help the circumstances you're born into, that everyone has the right to exist, and that if you keep surviving, you'll find people who will love and accept you. This leads to one of the most moving moments, and my personal favorite moment, in the entire series.
ロビンの敵はよくわかった。ソゲキング。あの旗撃ち抜け。
了解。
必殺ファイヤーバードスター りやがった。あいつら旗への攻撃の意味が分かってんのか。海賊たちが世界政府に宣戦布告しやがった。
ロビン、まだお前の口から聞いてねえ。行きたいとイエーイ。ロビン、ロビン、生きる。
お前はこの世に生きてちゃいけねえんだ、ロビン。
貴様の存在そのものが大罪なんだ、ロビン。
望んではいけないことだと思ってた。誰もそれを許してくれなかった。私は死にたいのよ。
海は広いんだで、いつか必ずお前を守ってくれる仲間が現れる。ルフィを信じろ。
もし本当に少しだけ望みを言っていいのなら、私は生きたい。私も一緒に海へ連れてって。
The whole series is staunchly anti-authority, and some arcs have really overt anti-colonial, anti-fascist, and anti-racist messages, with the whole thing having a very eat the rich feel to it.
この魚人島を救うヒーローになってくれ。
ヒーロー？やだ！
何を？
俺たちは海賊だぞ。ヒーローは大好きだけど、なるのは嫌だ。
The crew cares way more about dreams and adventure than wealth or power over others.
俺たちエウシャイだけだ。
おい、あんたこの黄金受け取ってくれるんじゃないのかなあ。
いらないみたい。
そんな
Often being outright disinterested in those things in a way that surprises the people around them.
だからよ、俺は海賊王になるんだよ。偉くなりてえわけじゃねえ。
おい、何言ってんだこいつ。
The main characters spend a lot of their time interrogating lies put forth by the world government or performing good deeds the government then lies about and takes credit for. And some of my favorite characters are Marines, who are decent people who struggle ideologically when faced with pirates who are more capable of doing good in the world than they are.
良くなってみせろ。
受けなさい。上層部に逆らうとあなたどうなるか。
俺たちがクロコダイルを仕留めた。それができなくてうちの部下は泣いてんだぜ。おい君、政府上層部のジジイどもに伝えてくれるかな。
スモーカー君。
クソくらえってな。
俺お前嫌いじゃねえな。
さっさと行け。
The big villains in the series are all, of course, in ideological opposition to Luffy and his crew.
すべてを許そう、ニコ・ロビン。なぜなら俺は最初から誰一人信用しちゃいねえからさ。
And coming to blows over what's right happens much more often than tests of strength or whatever, including a great segment where Luffy and Zoro are trying to avoid confrontation and let a blowhard jackass beat him up, because who cares, until he hurts their new friend and then immediately gets wrecked. It really sucks that Oda others women and queer people so brutally, but in spite of that, the series as a whole is about being accepting of difference, about trying to learn about and accommodate other cultures, about never taking anything at face value and always being suspect of those in power.
海賊が悪、海軍が正義、そんなものはいくらでも塗り替えられてきた。 平和を知らねえガキどもと戦争を知らねえガキどもとの価値観は違う。頂点に立つ者が善悪を塗り替える。今この場所こそ中立だ。正義は勝つって？そりゃそうだろう。勝者だけが正義だ。
Sincerity and ambition are first and foremost over dignity or seriousness or self-preservation. Characters ugly cry, fights and many scenes outside of fights are bloody and brutal, and suffering and death are unforgettable constants in this universe. But another constant is the possibility of overcoming them, or at least fear of them, together.
Luffy. 何よ。何も知らないくせに。8年間この島で何があったのか知らないくせに。
ああ、知らね
あんたには関係ないから。島から出てきって言ったでしょ。
ああ、言われた。
出てけ！あんたなんか出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ、出てけ。
It's far from perfect. There are occasional mixed messages, and since it's been going for 20 years, it does have some arcs that are a little bit repetitive. But I can't think of anything that was better suited for me as a weird kid. Oda's art style pretty heavily influenced how I draw, and his approach towards world building and somehow sustaining a sense of mystery and adventure over so many years is, as far as I'm concerned, unparalleled. I remember probably over 10 years ago, reading a review of One Piece that said you'd enjoy it as long as your inner child hadn't been surgically removed. And I always thought that was an apt description. Oda wanted to make the kind of story he would have wanted to read as a boy. And because of that, it's never lacking in humor or mystique, and it will draw in anyone who's willing to let their guard down and channel that childlike wonder. I've been doing a whole lot of research on parasocial relationships, and a lot of the appeal to One Piece is definitely the feeling that you're along for the adventure with Luffy's crew. Even at such a young age, One Piece taught me the value of sincerity and unrestrained creativity. I picked it up at a time where I was really alienated, and I became completely obsessed with it. One Piece is about learning that you can go through anything and still retain your humanity and your sense of humor. And that if you do have to die one day...
Zoro! Sanji! Zoppu! Nami!
終わり？俺、死んだ。
You might as well live a full and authentic life without regret or fear. And for a lonely, grieving kid who often felt out of place, it was a gift. I'm still friends with people I met online when I was 14 years old thanks to One Piece, and I've hung out with a lot of them in person. So on top of it being a huge creative influence, I have it to thank for some of my most enduring friendships as well. I was lagging behind in new releases for a couple of years, and I was worried I would permanently lose interest. Recently, though, I caught up literally overnight, because once I started reading it again, I couldn't put it down. To get the same enjoyment out of a piece of media I started reading 14 years ago is wonderful, and something I honestly didn't expect. When I revisited it, I also thought about my current friends, online and off, warmly. To have friends who accept you completely for who you are and who are there for you. To go through life milestones together. To work with them towards accomplishing shared goals and reaching heights you know you couldn't have reached alone. That's something that, as a lonely kid, I didn't really think I would have. Despite being a film person, I never really used movies for escapism, but I certainly used One Piece for it for a long time. And while it's still a really fun read and something I'm definitely going to keep up with, I'm so glad and so fortunate that I don't need it, because I'm finally at the point where I'm living the life it told me to hold out for. Hey, thanks for watching! If you want to learn more about film culture and film history, check out my So You Want to Be a Film Nerd web series. This is my second essay in the series about media that changed my life, so if you want to see more of that, check out my video about Hot Fuzz. I also have in-depth video essays on the show Hannibal and on video games as a medium, along with short comedy and horror films on my channel. If you enjoyed this, please consider donating to my Patreon, so I can keep making video essays like this one. Thanks!
How do you know Hannibal?
One could argue intimately.
Nakama? It's a Japanese word for very close friends.
Yes, we were nakama.
She